George Johnson?
Hey, John.
How are ya?
Good. Feliz Navidad.
Yes. Well, happy winter solstice. We're not actually taping on winter solstice, but I think this is going to be aired on December 22nd, which is the shortest day of the year.
Yeah. Really? It's the 22nd and not the 21st? I always get confused about that.
I just checked. I think it actually varies from year to year, but I just checked with Susie. She's the expert on winter solstice because she's a pagan, and we celebrate it.
She's literally a pagan?
Yeah, she's a witch.
Wow. Does she belong to the Church of Wicca?
Well, her idea of she doesn't like to belong to any church, so she's a solitary practitioner. But we celebrate winter solstice at our house. So on that night, we are going to go out into the woods. We build a fire. We take some candle lanterns out with us, and then the high point is we sacrifice a cat. No, just kidding. Susie actually proposed that for this year, but I thought that would not be sending a good message for the children.
For some context, I'll refer our viewers who may not have seen the previous episode to my posting on the Santa Fe Review about Susie and don't let her around your cats.
Right. It's funny. The moral complexities just keep multiplying here. Just a couple of days ago, I took these muffins out of our bread drawer, and they had been nibbled. And I looked at Susie and I said, gross, look at this. And she admitted that we're totally infested with mice now who've been attracted by all the bird food in our house.
All the bird food, sure. Yeah. We need some cats.
I said, Susie, I think the solution is we need to get a cat. And she wasn't amused. She just...
got rid of our mice.
Yeah?
All kinds of other things, but... So a solstice celebration, that does sound nice.
It is.
With the fire.
I wrote an essay for the New York Times. It was actually published on Christmas Day a few years ago about how and why we celebrate winter solstice. I'll post it as one of the links for this chat.
Yeah, I missed that. I'll go back and read that. I'm seeing now on Wikipedia that they're saying that the solstice can occur any time between December 20th and 23rd in the northern hemisphere. Yeah,
my calendar actually says that the 22nd is the shortest day of the year. So
yeah, so that's it then. Yeah.
Yeah. So today.
Oh, well, that's good. That's a nice time. We have Wiccans here in Santa Fe, but even more remarkably up in Los Alamos. The home of the great scientific laboratory and the Manhattan Project, and they have a coven of Wiccans, and those signs you see where different groups adopt a stretch of road and pick up the trash?
Yeah.
When you're driving into Los Alamos from a certain direction, it's like the next mile or 2 miles has been adopted for trash pickup by the Church of Wicca, Los Alamos.
That's great. You guys are... Santa Fe, this is one of the things I loved about Fire in the Mind. You have such an amazing diversity of worldviews and spiritualities in your neck of the woods.
Yeah. I mean, that's what really struck me, that you have, like Los Alamos is up on the top of the Pajarito Plateau, which means like Little Bird Mesa, and at the foot of the mesa is the San Ildefonso Pueblo, which is, ancient Tewa culture that, probably descendants of the Anasazi and still practicing many of their traditional rituals and dances, and a lot of them work at Los Alamos.
Yeah. There was a court case a couple of years ago that Susie was following pretty closely involving, let's see, how did it go? I think it was a Wiccan soldier who was killed in Iraq, and his family was requesting that he be buried with a pentagram on his tombstone.
Right, I remember that.
And
I guess there's a whole panoply of religious symbols that you can choose for your federal gravestone.
Yeah, and
they didn't include the pentagram.
Well, and this wasn't acknowledged as an official religion by the Pentagon, and so they refused to allow this.
By the Pentagon, that's ironic.
That's right. I said it. I'm punny.
I mean, we all know that the Pentagon is shaped like is shaped to remind us of the pentagram. And, it's basically a coven of witches, and then they have an outpost in Los Alamos. And there's probably someone who believes that, and they have a web page.
Oh well, the federal government, I'm sure, is a hotbed of all kinds of cultish thinking. But
the Freemasons and the Illuminati.
That's right. And just look at the dollar bill, and you can see all those signs.
Yeah, the eye and the pyramid. Hey, you don't really believe like in wood nymphs and nature spirits and things like that, though, right?
No, I don't. But Susie's got a pretty. She's got a pretty magical relationship to nature. So it's really, for us, it's about nature worship more than anything else.
Yeah.
And as I tried to explain in this piece I did for the Times, it's sort of a celebration or a ritual that's designed to get us to pause and take stock and pay attention to our own lives, pay attention to each other. After we go outside and we build this fire and we sit around it and we freeze our asses off and finally come in, Susie has this photo album that she prepares each year, and it takes us through the whole year and reminds us of all the things that we've done in that year. So we flip through the photo album.
Oh, that's great!
And it really is. It's a wonderful ritual, and I think it's spiritual in the best sense, that it makes you feel grateful to be alive without invoking any supernatural power to explain it all.
But you're still up against the great mystery of the unknowable. Why are we here?
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I really love Christmas for kind of similar reasons. None specifically religious, but Santa Fe is really special at Christmas.
Uh-huh.
Like on Christmas Eve in the old historic neighborhood where I live, the people line the streets with, well, up here they call them farolitos, little lanterns.
Uh-huh.
And they're made out of just regular little, like I think number 8 small grocery sacks. And you fold over the top, down a few flaps so it stands up square, and put a couple of inches of sand in the bottom of the candle.
Oh, I love that when people, we have friends who have parties and they put those out. And
yeah, I think it started here. It's
really?
kind of a Spanish-American tradition. And they used to use, in Albuquerque they call them luminarias, which, means about the same thing. And in Santa Fe they call them farolitos. And the story is that they used to be, people would actually build bonfires. In fact, here in Santa Fe, they will, every block or so, someone will build a bonfire. And those are called luminarias in Santa Fe. But it's really nice on Christmas Eve to walk, like down Canyon Road and then up Acequia Madre, and it's all lined with this candlelight.
Oh, I should mention that because I can see this little image of myself here on my computer screen, and behind me, I put up a string of lights for this chat.
Christmas lights.
Well, actually, it's sort of my own special string of Christmas lights. It's a string of skulls. So I don't know if the Blogging Heads people, unless they have a really big screen, probably won't be able to resolve the actual skulls. They'll just see these blobs of light. But those are, in fact,
skulls. They're skulls.
So I normally have them
this
in front
cult
of
that
me.
you belong to.
Pardon me?
It's one of the sacraments, involved in the sacraments of this cult that you belong to.
Yeah, well, it's a memento mori, a reminder of death, and I think that's an important part of spirituality too. To remember that our time here is fleeting, and it's not such a terrible thing to remind ourselves of our mortality now and then, so that we Oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to say this. But so that we cherish each moment, George.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's very inspiring, and I'll probably feel that way for a little while while I'm walking amongst the lights on, when is that, Monday? Monday night is Christmas Eve?
God, I guess it is. It's really rushing up. And, for our kids, of course, it's just this orgy of consumerism, getting all this stuff that they want.
I just really love the lights, though, and the music, and that's really nice.
Me too.
Nice Christmas choral concert down at there's a Catholic church next door here, and they have a really nice Christmas choral concert every year, so that was kind of inspiring.
Well, for me, one of the sacraments of this time of year is also playing pond hockey. I've already gotten 4 games in.
Oh yeah, right. Last time we talked, you were rushing off to
I had a
battle with some giant Swede.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
You know something? There's an issue has come up in pond hockey. I have good reason to believe that some of my fellow players are taking human growth hormone.
Really?
Because their playing ability is just too good to believe. So, of course, the only thing, I'm not going to confront them. I'm just going to...
we talked about that before and kind of agreed that it didn't bother either of us personally.
No, well, we're talking about professional athletes.
Taking amphetamines to study for their law school boards or something.
Yeah, so I'm going to have to procure some of this stuff myself.
Oh, no.
I remember Scientific American in 1990.
This is supposed to be fun. This is supposed to be something you do to relax.
Yeah, well, sure.
Damage yourself.
But I relax even more if I beat the crap out of everybody else out in the ice.
Yeah, but it's still, the physical effects are harmful, right?
Well, this is interesting. I've been doing a little background reading on human growth hormone, and there was this big study. Actually, it was only 12 subjects, but got a lot of attention. It was in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1990, and this is when human growth hormone developed this reputation as an anti-aging remedy. They gave this stuff to 12 men all over the age of 60, and it increased their muscle mass and decreased their fat. And so now there are these clinics where you can get this stuff prescribed if you are infirm in some way. And there are some people, of course, who take it even if they're perfectly healthy. And the athletes have heard about this, obviously. But there was a big meta-analysis that was published earlier this year by a group at Stanford that found that it confirmed, actually, that there is this significant decrease in fat and increase in muscle mass by about 5 pounds on average. But what's interesting is that there's no increase in actual muscle strength.
Just mass.
Yeah, which is kind of puzzling.
Yeah, and how about, doesn't it have all kinds of horrible effects on, like giving extra strain on your heart and things like that?
It didn't mention that. It said that there's a risk of diabetes, there's joint swelling and joint...
and you're actually thinking seriously of doing this?
No, I don't need that stuff.
Okay. I was wondering, because you were getting down on me for taking anti-blood pressure pills, which I need to do to keep my blood pressure in check. And you're talking about taking hormones so you can beat out 70-year-old men playing ice pond hockey.
No, well, it's not
you're kidding.
It's not the 70-year-old that I'm worried about. It's this time of year, all these kids come home from prep school. The sons of some of the guys I play with, and it's a little depressing when you think you're really skating fast, and one of these kids just sort of glides effortlessly past you.
You got to get used to it, John.
I know, but
it's only going to get worse. Hey, to return to the Christmas theme, did you see the piece that Richard Dawkins had in the New Statesman?
That was great.
Yeah, where he pointed out that Isaac Newton was born on Christmas Day.
Yeah, I never did. You must have known that because you're a Newton file.
Yeah, I had known it but forgotten it, and I checked it out, and it's interesting. It was his birth was recorded as Christmas Day, but England hadn't yet changed from the Julian calendar, so in the modern accounting, he was actually born on January 4th, but he thought it was Christmas.
Yeah.
His parents did, there in Woolsthorpe, and that was really, I mean, Dawkins' point was, that, Christmas is fine, but, why celebrate this mythical being when we can celebrate Isaac Newton, who was born the same day and was much more important as far as bringing on the modern world and our scientific worldview, and so happy Newton Day. I don't know, it doesn't have the same ring. What was your take on that?
First of all, I have to laugh. There's sometimes when Dawkins is such a Scrooge, he's like a parody of himself, and he went through the whole Christmas story and pointed out how historians have debunked almost every single aspect of it. And but then what was interesting was that at the very end he said that he deplores the way the season has become sort of generic, and so now we say Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas, and of course you've got Hanukkah and Kwanzaa, and I guess there's even a Muslim holiday at this time of year, and Dawkins says that he doesn't like Happy Holidays. He prefers Merry Christmas, and he actually still gets a lot of pleasure out of the ritual of Christmas, as I think godless people, you and I feel the same way. So Dawkins too. That's kind of encouraging. So he's not such a Scrooge. God bless us, everyone. He says as he hoists Tiny Tim on his shoulders. Right. But I mean Isaac Newton Day. I mean, I guess my feeling is that. Whatever the historical truth is of Jesus Christ, he probably was a lot more important, at least the story, than Isaac Newton as far as shaping modern culture. And, just the lessons of the Sermon on the Mount, you can be a complete agnostic and just admire them. That's right. And I remember in Christmas when I was a kid, of course, for us, a lot of the pleasure. I grew up in this family of 5 kids, and so we'd go downstairs, and there'd be all these presents there. My parents really were very generous to us, and part of the ritual was that they would wait until we went to sleep when we were little kids, and they'd decorate the tree until late into the night. And so the story was that Santa Claus brought the tree. Yeah. Right, we did that too. And I never met anyone else who did that. I think it's pretty common, and it was so it was very magical. And I remember my brother and I my brother's 2 years younger than I am, and we normally fought constantly and viciously. Yeah. And on Christmas we always had a truce. We lived by the Sermon on the Mount, and we declared our, not love for each other, but we just decided not to hate each other on that day. Yeah, and brief tolerance. Yeah. So it was a good feeling. Yeah, it's funny, the memories associated with that day. But, so what else are we going to talk about? Well, we should do some science, I guess. We can I know. I was going to ask you about Steven Pinker. Didn't he come out to your program and give a lecture? Yeah, I'd like to talk about Pinker, but why don't we, I think maybe a better segue, at least for a little bit, from what we've been talking about, Newton and Dawkins and people like that, would be, we'll see how this works, but the talk that you sent me by our old friend Murray Gell-Mann. Yeah, right, that's true, because Newton, that was the perfect segue right there. Yeah. I love how this, so this was a talk that Murray Gell-Mann gave at the TED conference recently. Right. And it got picked up by this blog called 3 Quarks a Day, which really has nothing to do with quarks, which of course is what Gell-Mann is known for
discovering or inventing, but it's really kind of a nice little window onto some things on the web you might not find otherwise, having to do with science and other intellectual issues. But anyway, I was struck by, having written a biography of Murray and become his enemy as a result. It was nice to see him in good form and giving this, really very funny talk.
Yeah, I guess I had heard from you, or maybe somebody else as well, that Murray was very frail and he was sort of a shadow of himself. And
that's what I'd been hearing too. And the last time I saw him, which was a few months ago, I went by the Santa Fe Institute because I needed to drop off something, a copy of my manuscript for someone, and there was Murray right standing there in the hallway, and I said, "Murray," and he kind of looked over and smiled, and then he remembered who I was and just started kind of grumbling, and he was civil, but then he just sort of. I just remember him kind of stooped over and grumbling and sort of walking away in a cloud, like there was a cartoon character like that. I can't remember
not
who it was.
Not Mr. Magoo.
No, yeah, but there are certain resemblances there too. But yeah, then to see this wonderful talk, and he's just in top form, just this beautiful defense of what seems to me a very Platonist idea about the laws of the universe, and the fact that the laws are the laws, and they don't depend on, the aliens wouldn't find different laws than we do, and
yeah, and there were two other big themes in this talk, and I agree. I thought it was, Gelman and I have certainly, he's not a big fan of mine either, apparently, after the things I wrote about him in Scientific American. And
he complained about you bitterly when I interviewed him for the book.
But anyway, this was, he was bringing up some of the same themes in this talk that we had discussed when I interviewed him for The End of Science. And one is the idea that beauty is a very powerful guide in physics. Beauty and simplicity, which he sees as very closely related. And the other idea is that once you have the basic laws of physics, that's really all you need to, in a fundamental way, to explain the universe. And Gelman rejects the idea that science needs what he calls something more.
Yeah, right. He'd say it's the laws plus a whole lot of accidents.
Right. So the laws play out in history in various complicated ways, but it's not as though there is some entirely new law out there in nature that still remains to be discovered that will help us explain complex emergent phenomena. So that's
but he sidesteps the question that we talked about last time of where are these laws? Where's the tablet where the laws are written, and where does mathematics come from? But those kind of questions have never interested him, from what I can see. Then he would say, "Oh, well, you're getting into that philosophy stuff."
Well, that was what was a little disappointing about this talk was that, and I thought, man, we could take these points one after another. But the first one, that simplicity and elegance and beauty are guides for discovering the laws of nature. Maybe we could start with that one.
Yeah, some people might find that kind of mystical, depending on. I mean, if it's simplicity, if that's how you're defining elegance, simplicity and symmetry, mathematical symmetry, maybe that's not such a mystical idea.
Well,
as guides for the laws.
See, I thought he was going to explain why it should be the case that the laws of nature are beautiful, sort of mathematically beautiful, but he just kind of laid out.
It was just like a 15, 20-minute talk.
Yeah, so he touched on this, the idea, there's this famous paper by Eugene Wigner, The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics, and it is a mystery, and I just thought Gelman would, I wanted to hear his explanation of that, and he sort of just described the problem in its entirety and talked about beauty in the physics sense, but the explanation never came.
Yeah, I mean, one way to think about it, I think, is like with algorithmic complexity theory and the idea that something is, a law is like a compression of a lot of data into the most compact form. So, it's like if you receive a string of data from outer space, like, through the SETI program or something, and, and it basically seems to be random, but then you suddenly pick out this pattern.
Yeah.
Maybe you find that there, there's a pattern that occurs every, 10 billion digits, and then if you can reduce that to some little equation or algorithm that produces the pattern, you've simplified and thrown away the extraneous information and come up with kind of a compact law that's symmetrical and beautiful, maybe.
Yeah, except that so Gell-Mann makes several questionable claims here. For example, equating beauty, and this is what you were just implying too, equating beauty with simplicity and compression. And
but they wouldn't be laws if they weren't simple and compressed.
Yeah, but
because they have to explain more than you have to get more out of the law than appears to be in its statement.
Okay, well here, first of all, the beauty that Gell-Mann is alluding to is accessible only to very few people. The beauty that's inherent in quantum electrodynamics or chromodynamics or
group theory,
general relativity. This requires lots and lots of training, and it strikes me that some of what they call beauty might be the spectacular success of these theories at predicting and explaining a wide range of phenomena.
Yeah.
And
but
also,
I think even though, like, say, understanding group theory in any great detail, which is kind of at the basis of the the modern formulation of the Standard Model in particle physics, while it would take years of study to understand that anywhere close to the way someone like Murray Gell-Mann understands it, it's still I think an outsider can appreciate the symmetry and the it maybe superficially or more generally can understand why just using metaphor, for example, like the idea that you can take a abstract Rubik's Cube, multi-dimensional kind of object, and depending on which way you twist it in space, the face represents a different particle.
Yeah. Well, let me just give you...
So you simplified and reduced, a whole lot of seemingly unconnected data down to some symmetry, and then you can appreciate that as being simple and beautiful.
Well, let me just give you a couple of counter-argument. First of all, as I think you've pointed out, you have a lot of beautiful theories that turn out not to be true. So the theory of magnetic monopoles, by all accounts, was mathematically a very beautiful theory. Turned out not to be true.
And phlogiston was a very beautiful theory. And even explained a lot.
Yeah, if you had the Ptolemaic description of planetary motion, you had circles instead of ellipses. A lot of people would think that's more beautiful.
Oh yeah, a lot of people do. In fact, that's still what we use for navigation, on the open sea, essentially, because we have to use a coordinate system with the Earth in the center because that's where we are, and then you have Ptolemy and his epicycles back. Oh yeah, the Ptolemaic system. I mean, it was just brilliant.
Well, then also there's the fact that, and there's the problem of beauty being in the eye of the beholder. So you've got superstring theorists. Edward Witten, the guru of superstring theory, once told me that string theory is too beautiful to be wrong. But there are a lot of people. Peter Voigt, the string theory critic, says he doesn't find it beautiful at all. He thinks it's rather kludgy and jury-rigged. Of course, then it depends.
It's kind of, It depends. Bob and I were talking about that one day on when you were off in Portugal, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when you have all these, it's not just you have the 10 dimensions, but you have the 10 to the power of 500 different ways of curling them up, and each one representing a different potential set of physical laws. So yeah, I could see what you mean about whether that's beautiful or not being in the eye of the beholder. Although that's a case where I suspect if I understood it more deeply, I would see what Witten was talking about.
Well, but then there's also the issue of what strikes us as beautiful in realms other than physics. So
the golden mean.
Well, but when you look at I'll cite two examples: one in literature and one in art. Shakespeare, I think, is maybe arguably the greatest writer ever, and I think his greatness has to do with the complexity of his language and the complexity of the ideas and the complexity of his characters. If you go to take Rembrandt as arguably certainly one of the greatest painters ever, and again, these are very complex, visually complex objects that he's created.
But in both cases, though, aren't they expressing really simple, basic, human, universal themes? I mean, a lot of people would say Shakespeare's beautiful because we can read him today, or read the person who used the name Shakespeare to write the plays, or Douglas Hofstadter once wrote an essay that said Shakespeare Shakespeare wasn't written by Shakespeare but by someone with the same name or something.
Right.
But anyway, but he's very basic universal themes that speak across the centuries, and you could say that's where the beauty is, and it's the simplicity underlying this complexity.
Oh, I don't know, but the plays themselves and the language are extremely complex and lend themselves to an infinite number of interpretations, and that's a type of beauty that I find much more compelling. It's a human beauty. This is another problem with the whole notion of the beauty of physics. It's a very cold, austere beauty, even if you are a physicist or a mathematician who can appreciate these mathematical symmetries. It's that's not what most people mean by beauty. Stephen.
Well, you could contrast that, I guess, the beauty of physics and say the fearful symmetry of the Lie groups and group theory, and contrast that to the burgeoning diverse beauty of the ecosystem and the forest. I've just been rereading a book by Annie Dillard, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek.
Oh yeah,
and
I love that.
And that
just
sort of
book.
Reminds me of all that. And,
or
reading Lewis Thomas about cells and just all the diversity, and for every little reaction going on in a cell, there's something reversing it, and just this amazing complexity. And that's why chemistry is starting to really attract me too, reading about that and just realizing how very little about chemistry I've managed to know in all these years, and how each element has a different personality. But all this being inspired by Uncle Tungsten, Oliver Sacks' book. But still, underlying all that beauty with chemistry is the idea of the symmetries of the periodic table, and just this incredible idea that you can put all of these diverse elements into families and relationships and explain their peculiar personalities through their atomic structure.
Yeah, so where do you think the beauty comes from? That normally
probably both directions, but as far as talking about beauty as a guiding principle in science, I think simplicity and reducing something to basic principles and generalizing is really the driving force more than seeking diversity and complication.
So then the question, when I said where does the beauty come from, I guess I meant in a metaphysical sense. So depending on your inclinations, so Murray Gell-Mann would, he's an atheist, he's anti-supernatural. He would reject any idea that that the beauty and the symmetry of the fundamental laws points to some kind of deity, but there are other
right.
writers.
It comes from the beauty of mathematics.
Right. But
then, where does mathematics come from?
Where does mathematics?
No, I see what you're. I agree with you. That,
where does this beauty?
I mean, ultimately, he's giving a very Platonist kind of view, where there's this thing called mathematics out there, and these beautiful forms that we can commune with, and that's definitely a very mystical idea.
And you can argue, as I guess I am, that this is a very restricted view of beauty we're talking about when it comes to physics. But still, there's the beauty that I'm looking at right outside my window here, the beauty of the natural world, the beauty of birds and laurel bushes and snow across a hillside. And, what's that about?
And uniqueness,
Why should we respond to nature in this way? So I remember Steven Weinberg had a passage in Dreams of a Final Theory where he was talking about the beauty that some physicists see in the laws of nature, and he thought it was so inhuman that he certainly rejected the idea that this indicated that God is a geometer. That was the phrase he used.
Oh yeah.
And he said if God is a geometer, he doesn't want to have anything to do with him. But then Weinberg went on to say, sometimes I must admit nature seems more beautiful than strictly necessary.
Yeah, but that's only, somehow because it resonates with our nervous systems and our neural networks.
Right.
In the way that they evolved and co-evolved with nature. So, maybe it's no more mystical than, a bell resonating with a certain frequency of another bell, that, it's just, just because we're attuned to nature, because we're part of nature, and maybe this is what we feel with some kind of beauty, like when you're out in the woods and, suddenly you sit down on this rock and you realize and look around at just all the detail and this whole universe that's going on all around you, and then this is just, and it's completely unique, and then you go up and leave and it's still there. There's something very, very wonderfully mysterious about that.
Well, there is I'm sure you've heard of the biophilia hypothesis. I don't think Ed Wilson coined that phrase, Ed Wilson, the biologist at Harvard, but he helped to popularize it. He wrote a book, or maybe it was a collection of essays by him and other people on biophilia, and the idea is that our sense of nature's beauty, our attraction to certain kinds of landscape, and our sense that lots of nature is beautiful, our sort of resonance with it, as you put it, is probably an adaptive trait. That in particular we gravitate towards certain types of landscape because those would have been more conducive to our survival. Landscape with trees that might provide shelter, with water running through it, with
wide open spaces where you can see your game and also see your prey and avoid your predators.
Yeah, that kind of thing. It's kind of a weak explanation.
It's interesting to watch. Like sometimes our cats will get on the roof and they just have these places that they like to perch with their back against the wall and where they can see out across the whole little Santa Fe River Valley, and it's like you're just imagining that they're enjoying the view, but it's it's obviously something that's wired in by evolution, and maybe this is similar to the feeling you get like when you're driving and you come out of like a real thick, dark, oppressive kind of forest, and suddenly the plains open up in front of you, and it's exhilarating feeling.
I think animals can experience aesthetic joy. I think it would be more of a stretch to say that they don't. I mean, we're obviously on a continuum.
There's a whole question about at what level does consciousness pop out of the complexity of the brain cell. So yeah, maybe a glimmer of that.
Well, one more thing about the
they're also looking for birds. But okay, go on.
I was just going to say, just quickly, the something more phrase of Gelman. My take on that in the end of science was that, I felt the same way when I saw him give this talk, is that he's sort of saying, I mean, it's the ultimate chauvinistic physics thing to say. He said the fundamental laws are the laws that we have discovered, and Gell-Mann played a really important part of that in helping to discover quarks and figure out how the strong nuclear force works. And he's saying that everything else is kind of secondary, and if you had time, you can derive everything from these laws. Which is totally,
yeah, that's what. Who was it? Was that Rutherford who said that there's physics and everything else is stamp collecting?
Which is just such bullshit. I mean,
yeah.
So you have,
for
example, you can't derive.
Not how it struck me.
You can't derive evolution, natural selection, the genetic. You can't derive biology.
No, but he said all that. I mean, that it's the laws plus all these accidents, because there's all different ways that the laws can play out. So, I mean, you can basically build the hydrogen atom, the simplest atom from basic quantum mechanics, as I understand it. And by the time you get to helium, which is the second most complex atom, it's just intractably complex, and you can't really derive it from first principles, but you can sort of metaphorically apply the same rules all the way up the periodic table, and you can test them by making various predictions and show that the foundation is solid. But you obviously can't go from quantum electrodynamics to describing how the a crow locking you in the bird cage.
No, that's definitely a stretch.
But Murray would never say that. He
implied it. The way his language, fundamental laws plus accidents, that is much too casual a way to get at biology.
There are laws at higher levels.
Well, I think
but those laws can be reduced to. You can. What's the old saying? You can reduce downward, but you can't explain upward. So you could take the crow and everything that's going on in its muscles and brains, and you could reduce it to biology, and reduce the biology to electrochemical reactions, and reduce that to basic chemistry, which you can reduce to basic physics, and it all does at some point come down to quarks and leptons. But you can't start with the quarks and leptons and come up with the crow.
Well, I guess the retort that I would have to Gell-Mann, and you might argue that he's saying this anyway, but I don't think he is, it would be the retort of Phil Anderson, another Nobel laureate who won for work in solid-state physics. He had this famous essay that came out in Science in the 1970s called "More is Different," and the idea of that was that there are these profound disconnects in nature when you go to different scales. So there's a profound disconnect between physics and chemistry, even, and between chemistry and biology, and you do need to find very new and powerful and fundamental laws at these higher levels. And I think
Phil and Murray have wonderful arguments about that.
Right. They should be on blogging heads.
Phil is fantastic, but again, it's an interesting debate, because laws do seem to spring up at these different levels of complexity, but Gell-Mann would argue that in principle they can be explained, in terms of the more basic laws all the way down to the subatomic basement. So
I reject that. I don't think that's true. I think there are discontinuities there, or where
what do you mean by discontinuities?
In other words, when you
have to be like new forces springing into
existence. Well, it depends what you mean
be
by explaining one level in terms of a deeper level. What you want to know about life has nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do with nuclear physics. There's just
it does.
They're completely different levels of meaning.
Carbon, man.
Yeah, but that's not anyway.
Yeah. Well, so there's two ways to think about it. I mean, obviously, laws spring up at different levels, and the question is whether those laws are rooted in the level below. And I think most scientists would say, yeah, and some, certainly in principle they are, but again, you can, reduce them downward, but you can't explain them upward.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. The best part of the Murray talk to me was right at the beginning, and this was actually our segue, which we forgot about, but it started off and Murray's on stage looking like Father Christmas, and then there's portraits behind him, and one is of Isaac Newton, and one's of Albert Einstein, and the first thing Murray says is, I want to thank you for putting up those pictures of my colleagues.
Yeah. That's great. This is the thing that, I made him look like a real asshole when I wrote about him, but there's some assholes who are charming in their assholeness.
He's not, I wouldn't call him that. He can be a real jerk.
Yeah, it's just that he's
a little lesser.
So full of himself.
But he's also just he can be just so wonderfully, he's just so smart and just this active mind, and just when I spent about more than 12 hours altogether, formally interviewing him for the biography, and just listening to recall these stories from his childhood, and it was just really just watching him light up, and he's someone who really believes in the power of reason and the mind, and a real commitment against superstition and groundless beliefs, and so I think it's really admirable.
Yeah, I think there's much to admire in him. It's just that he, he's always got to be.
Oh, but yeah, he can just cut you down like with a stiletto with 6 words.
He's always got to be the smartest person, not only in the room but on the planet, and it's just relentless. Yeah. And it's too bad that he has that trait, because
that's kind of true. Although that's more when he's with people who are genuinely less intelligent, like you or I.
Oh, I'm not conceding anything.
I'll speak for myself anyway. But when you see Murray around people he considers to be his equals, especially younger scientists, like someone like Seth Lloyd, and you don't get that feeling of one-upmanship at all. It's really more of a communing of great minds. He just sort of feels like there's probably only maybe 10 people he knows that fall into that category, and everyone else he might be playing some. Well, it also works on the other end of the scale too, though. I've seen him be just very, very, not sure what the word is, but some positive adjective with, people that he just knows aren't on his level intellectually, and
right.
And they aren't scientists, and they're just
common folk.
Common folk.
Well, let me give you here. Okay, I've got a segue before we run out of time to Pinker.
Oh yeah, and I have a brief garage band experiment too.
Oh, okay.
So,
well, Pinker. Yeah, so the reason.
Oh yeah, metaphors. Pinker.
Yeah. So Pinker, Steve Pinker, the Harvard psychologist, linguist, student of the human mind and of human nature, came to Stevens last week to give a talk, and he was great, and he is the nicest guy. He really is a very gracious and gentle person. He reminded me of Ed Wilson in that regard. He was also just a remarkably gracious and generous person. And it was, there's something that always has bothered me about Pinker intellectually, and I think now I've resolved it in his favor. So I always felt that there was a contradiction in his work where, for example, in Blank Slate, and this is true also in How the Mind Works, but in Blank Slate, which came out a few years ago, and is trying to refute the notion that our minds are blank slates that are inscribed upon by experience and that there is no innate human nature. Pinker totally rejects that. And he comes out in favor of what he calls a tragic view of human nature, which says that we're limited by our biology in what we can do. Human possibilities are limited. And then a lot of the book, though, so he's got this tragic view, and he's ridiculing people who he calls blank slaters or utopianists who think that human nature is infinitely malleable and so forth. But when he gets into the sort of subtleties of how his view of the mind plays out, he comes up with a very positive, optimistic, sort of bourgeois, liberal way of looking at life and human nature. And I always thought that that was a contradiction, but now I think it's really just sort of a healthy tension or paradox in his work. So he's saying basically that our biology represents both a kind of prison and our means of escaping from that prison, because we also are endowed with these big brains that allow us to understand ourselves and our own biological impulses, and to, in some cases, and to an extent, transcend them.
Yeah.
And in his new book, Stuff of Thought, he has the same. It's really an interesting book. It's a little. It's long, but it's very rewarding. And there's the same.
I started reading that when I talked to Christine Keneally, and just found it fascinating. But go on, because I read something in it last night I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah, I'll just make this one other point, and then I get your reaction. That Pinker describes language, and he sort of brings up all these theories that portray language as a kind of prison, as something that that in a way enslaves us, so that all we know is language, and our words kind of hem us in and are this barrier between us and reality. And this is a view that's come up over and over again in intellectual history, and Pinker rejects that. And he says that it's true to an extent, but words also are means of escaping from the prison of language.
That puts it so well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that really makes I understand better now what I read last night, which I've been kind of reading around in the book at random, and I read the chapter on metaphor.
Yeah.
Because you'd mentioned that he had talked about metaphor in George Lakoff.
That's right.
And Lakoff has this idea that, actually Lakoff wrote an interesting book in which he tries to explain the question we were considering before, where mathematics comes from, by showing how it comes out of the body.
Yeah.
And it's all just metaphor, and it's just this very physical, rooted, embodied thing, which is kind of a jargon term now. But, and then, as Pinker explained Lakoff in his book, Lakoff basically believes mathematics is a metaphor arising out of our body and in relationships with the physical world, and at the same time, everything we think entirely in terms of metaphors, of relating one thing we know about the physical world to another, and that we're trapped by these metaphors, that basically we can't think outside them. Does that sound right? That
yes.
We're limited by the metaphors, and then Pinker's making this argument that no, in fact, it's, as you say, it's true to some extent, but the metaphors help us, break out of these ruts and discover new relationships.
That's right, and even we can recognize when a metaphor is inadequate because we are intuiting something.
Yeah.
We're thinking at a level that goes deeper than the metaphor. So
there's something. Yeah, so Lakoff would say that we're just thinking. There's just these webs of metaphors, and that is thought.
Right.
And then for Pinker, that's like tools.
Yes.
And that there's some level deeper.
Exactly.
Than that, and that's the real thinking. What really drove that home for me was when he was talking about how it's very common for people to say, neuroscientists are using the computer as a metaphor for the mind or a metaphor for the brain. Mm-hmm. And then Pinker was saying, well, no, actually, I think what the case is, or they're using computation as a metaphor. And he was saying, if I understand him right, that no, there actually is something called computation, and the brain and these computers we build are both examples of them.
Right.
So it's not that we're constrained to think with this metaphor, but the metaphor has helped us find something out in the world in this relationship or patterns called computation that we might not have learned about otherwise.
Yeah, and Pinker does a pretty good job of showing that Lakoff, like a lot of postmodernists and truth doubters and skeptics, is self-contradicting. Mm-hmm. In that Lakoff, there's sort of the assumption of Lakoff's own theory is that we can describe the way that we use metaphors and get at an underlying truth of how language works for us. And Pinker argues, I think fairly persuasively, that in itself is a contradiction of Lakoff's theory. It's very similar to the debate that's been going on forever over, it's a theory that Pinker calls linguistic determinism. There's this guy named, I think, Benjamin Whorf, who proposed a very popular version of this back in the 1930s, maybe?
Yeah, that the Hopis don't have a word for time, and therefore they don't have any concept of time.
Right, and this theory keeps coming back in different forms. Lakoff, it's kind of a variant of that theory, and it's a very disturbing notion, and I think one of the really big ideas in Pinker's book, and one of the most important jobs that he undertakes in his book is basically to reject that idea. And it's a very positive, sort of uplifting notion that language is our servant, not our master, and that through language we can approach truth and discern truth imperfectly, always, but still we can do it.
So we're not all just trapped in this totalitarian text.
Yeah, which was a very, that was something that I worried about when I was an English major, that language, all words ultimately are defined by other words, so it forms this kind of self-enclosed, self-referential realm that is not...
Yeah, it's all this huge loopy tautology.
Yeah.
I still think that may be true.
By the way, Doug Hofstadter,
cool.
I'll link to this. He wrote a nice review of Pinker's book for the Los Angeles Times.
Oh, yeah, I saw that, actually. That was good.
Let me just, before we get to your experiment,
one
other point. I'm just bounce an idea off you. I meant to... bring this up with Pinker, but we didn't have time. We haven't even talked about the dirty words in Pinker. There was actually a review of this. He has a whole chapter on dirty words. In fact, there was a review in Science magazine. This has got to be a first for science. They talked about the Pinker's discussion of curse words, and they had the phrase "fuck you" in Science magazine.
Shocking.
Isn't that remarkable?
Wow. Yeah, they should do what the New York Times does.
If science can print "fuck you," I would think it's time for the New York Times to do it.
Oh, I hope not. God. But
let me.
We should talk. We're going to do a show next week, I guess, between the holidays.
Oh, so we can get into some of this later.
Yeah, because I'd like to read the chapter in Pinker's. I haven't read that one yet.
On the dirty words. Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, we can save, and I'll save this other point I was going to make. About language and science for next week.
Yeah, because otherwise we may not have anything to talk about. Right. We'll be all, blissed out because of the Christmas spirit.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so how about
this will be
GarageBand Science?
Yeah, in the last few GarageBand Science mini episodes, I've been doing high voltage stuff, up to 300,000 volts, and recently, since I was talking to you last time about reading Uncle Tungsten, Oliver Sacks' book, I think sometime in the context of one of our conversations, I said, how amazing it is that you can take a lemon, stick in a piece of zinc and a piece of copper, and it will produce a voltage and move the needle of a galvanometer. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, I know that's true in principle, but does it really work? And I tried it, and sure enough, it did. And then I got into doing all kinds of things, like I squeezed the lemons into a plastic cup, and I put in a brass wood screw, like yellow-colored brass wood screw, and on one end, and then on the other end I put in a dime, and then I hooked a wire, and then I hooked them up to a meter, and it measured about, I think half a volt or 0.7 of a volt, and I left it there for a couple of days, until I noticed that the voltage was starting to go down, and then I pulled out the screw, and I noticed that it had become plated with a silvery-colored metal on the end that was immersed in the solution of lemon juice.
Uh-huh.
And so I went to and I knew I knew it wasn't silver because they don't make dimes out of silver anymore because it would take way more than 10 cents worth of silver to make a dime. So went to the U.S. Mint website and I found out that dimes are now they're on the outside. It's a coating of a copper. What was it? A copper nickel alloy surrounding a core of something else. I think zinc maybe or copper.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I was pulling the voltage that was created by this little lemon juice battery was pulling the nickel ions out of the dime and depositing them on the screw. So I did that, and I plated the screw, and then I replaced the dime with a penny and put the screw back in, and it started pulling the copper out of the penny.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there's and again, there's barely any copper in a penny. It's a sheath of copper nickel alloy, mostly nickel, surrounding a zinc core.
Uh-huh.
But it was pulling what copper there was out, and I left it for a couple of days, and I pulled the penny out, and I'm just going to hold these up and show them. This is the screw, and you can see the yellow metal in the middle is the original color, and then on the end, the end where you use the screwdriver, it's nickel plated, and then on the other end, it's copper plated. And at the same time, I took the penny out, and it had removed so many copper atoms that it had basically eaten a hole in the penny, and you could see through into this zinc core on the inside of the penny.
So this is sort of the principle
electrochemistry, electroplating.
I was going to say, this is the principle behind electroplating.
Electroplating behind batteries and electrolysis, breaking down water into hydrogen and oxygen. All that stuff's going on. It's just this whole soup of chemical reactions.
Just before we started this chat, I glanced at the New York Times, and there's a front page story today about an MIT professor who's become this international internet star because his lectures have been videotaped, and I guess he's just this master at dramatizing principles of physics in the classroom with these wacky
Oh, that sounds
stunts.
great. I haven't seen that yet. What's his name?
Lewin, I think. Something Lewin.
I'll take a look at that.
And I was thinking of you when I read this. Apparently,
I'm sure he's much. I mean, I don't do it seriously. I just do it for entertainment purposes. So
watch
I
out.
think that would be I'm not in the same class.
Well, watch out. You might become.
This is MIT, man.
This might go viral. This George Mr. Wizard Johnson.
Well, we'll try. I mean, for my experiment today, the title of the experiment is "How many margaritas does it take to light up a light bulb?" So, once again, I'm going to move the camera to Studio B.
Cocktail physics.
Yeah, this is really cocktail physics. So, what you'll see here when you watch this, John, is two kind of funky Mexican margarita glasses that I think I got in Juarez. And behind them, for product placement, I don't know if you can do product placements retroactively, but there's a bottle of cheap Jose Cuervo tequila. Mm-hmm. And inside these two glasses, they're each filled at this point with lemon juice. And in each one, there's a copper strip and a zinc strip. And the copper is positive in this setup, and the zinc is negative. And then I have them hooked into series, so basically I have two margarita batteries here, and I have the either end hooked up to a little light-emitting diode. And now, first I will give an aerial view here of the setup. You can see the copper and zinc in the glasses, and I haven't put the final electrode in, so when I do that, the little light should come on, and it works.
All right.
I hope you can see this. It's kind of hard to. Yeah, you can see it's going on. It looks much better in real life.
Uh-huh.
Put my hand behind it to prove that it's lighting up. So basically, I'm getting enough electricity out of here to light up this light bulb, and so it takes two margaritas. But actually, this is just lemon juice. So I wanted to see what would happen when I put in the tequila, if that enhances the effect, or these are gonna, you don't want to use Herradura Gold for this. This is just like really cheap tequila that I would never drink. Yeah, the bulb's still going. Okay, so it takes 2 margaritas to light a light bulb. And in fact, if we were using, like a flashlight bulb instead of this little light-emitting diode, which just takes a tiny amount of current to operate, then we would, it would probably take a whole table full of, rows and rows of margaritas.
Uh-huh.
So that, anyway, is my whoa. Drop the telephone.
Still there? Oh, okay.
Sorry, I dropped the telephone.
Okay.
So that's my Christmas experiment, and just it's kind of a coda to that. Have you ever heard of the Baghdad battery?
No.
I just learned about this recently, and some archaeologists actually found something dated to I think 200 BC in Mesopotamia, and now it's apparently in a museum in Baghdad if it hasn't been looted. And it was a vessel, and inside the vessel there was it was like a ceramic vessel, and inside there was a smaller copper vessel with an iron rod sticking down in it. And if you poured lemon juice into this thing, or vinegar, it would be a battery. It would produce electricity. This is like 2,000 years old.
They're not suggesting that that's actually what it was used for.
Well, that's what no one knows, because they didn't find anything like wires around. So but some people have hypothesized that they may have actually used this for electroplating. Well, now they might have used it to give people electrical shocks during, like hook it up to a whole bunch of these batteries. It would take an awful lot of them up to a statue or something, and then the people could touch it and get electrical shocks.
Oh, I thought you were going to suggest that they had some version of Abu Ghraib back in 200 BC.
Well, maybe that too, yeah.
Well, it's always these, it's torture and death and destruction that always drive technological progress.
Yeah, I like to think that they were doing scientific experiments and discovering the basic laws of nature, and then it all got lost.
Just for its own sake.
Lost and rediscovered. Science for its own sake.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, anyway.
On that happy note.
Yeah, on that happy note. So we'll enjoy Christmas or Solstice or
both. We'll enjoy both.
Yep, sounds good. I will too.
And you too, George. I guess I will talk to you next week before New Year's.
Yeah, sounds good. That'll be fun.
All right.
Okay, John.
Take it easy.
Okay, bye.